All set.
Okay. Good evening. It's must be 7:03 now on Tuesday, August 8th. This is the continued hearing for the Milton Board of Appeals in the matter of 552 Adams Street LLC, Louis T. Falcone Jr., dated May 24. This is a continued hearing from a hearing that we held on July 25. I see Mr. Brennan is here, and the building commissioner is with us. Welcome. My name is Jeffrey Mullen. I'll be acting as the chair. Tonight's hearing with me are Kathleen O'Donnell and Theodore Daber, members of the board. Let me recall for those listening the record. At the last hearing, we did not complete the evidentiary portion of the hearing and did not deliberate except to a request of the applicant additional information, mostly around the parking. We had a conversation around monitoring the lot and taking care of the trash, and talked about signage. We talked about sweeping the sidewalk and a few other things. But largely, the board had several concerns about how the parking in the parking lot worked, how it was assigned, how it would work for the extended permit, since we believe this to be an essential, perhaps the essential fact that we need to conclude to make the finding necessary for the special permit. So on that, unless my fellow board members have something to add, I mean, I think that's a reasonably accurate reflection of where we've left this hearing. Hearing none, I'll just ask the applicant's authorized representative, Mr. Brennan, to let us know whether he's got any additional information to share with the board. Mr. Brennan, welcome to the Board of Appeals.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Daniel Brennan here. I am hoping that Louis Falcone can join. He said he was going to try to, in case he could address any concerns that are in his area. But basically, I marked up our parking plan, and I did have discussions with Louis about where our parking should be, and perhaps if we could put up some signage noting for Starbucks parking only. I did mark up our site plan just to kind of show where our spaces would be. And there would be 23 spaces left over for the office uses left over in the building. Basically, it's just that whole run except for 2 parking spaces along the back fence that we would put up some signage that say Starbucks customer parking only. I'm not. I can show you, but I thought it might be better if we did signage that had no parking in between these signs, other than Starbucks customers, rather than putting up 13 Starbucks parking only signs. I don't know if the board would think that which way would be a better approach, but I see Louis just joined too. So if you want, I can share my plans again, just so we can kind of go over it again. All right.
Please.
Sure. All right. So here is the civil engineer drawing. I'm going to zoom in a bit, and I'm just kind of showing you where we're marking the Starbucks parking spaces. This was agreed upon with us and the landlord as to where they should be situated. I will, and then we have another parking plan, which is basically just a repeat of showing where the Starbucks parking spaces would be. Basically just putting up signs that say Starbucks customer parking only. Not sure if that would fully address the issues. Maybe another sign at the entrance would help out also, but I'm not sure really what much else we could do on the Starbucks side to curtail any parking that's unauthorized in there. I don't know. Do you want me to go over the rest of the project just to run through what we're doing, or is this the main?
Not necessary from my perspective. Ms. O'Donnell, Mr. Tabor, do you want to hear anything else from the applicant?
I know, I think, we just really wanted to see where the parking is. And I guess the major question, is well, how's the enforcement for that going to happen? And that's really probably a question for the landlord than for the tenant.
I'd actually like to hear from the landlord since he's here. I think that's a good idea.
Hello, this is Lou.
Hello, Mr. Falcone. Welcome to the board.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Can you just speak briefly to your agreement with this parking plan and whether or not you've got a plan to enforce this and how this is going to be enforced?
My recollection from the original Starbucks hearing back in 2003 or 2004 was that the people of the town were very concerned about parking in the square. And my recollection is that the town wanted any excess parking to be available for people in the town. Now, if you're saying you don't want that, then that's something different. And the other thing is, how do you enforce it or regulate it short of having a police detail?
Yeah, that's a non sequitur from my perspective. We're not talking about public parking. Nobody mentioned public parking. There's really not a lot of public parking information in the record. The hearing we had last time was about the adequacy of the parking, given the three concerns we heard from residents about the inability to park in the lot if you were a Starbucks customer. Now, the plan that Starbucks has presented to the board will result in a fewer number of seats that are currently in the restaurant. So it's our thought that you will need less parking. However, the problem with the parking lot, I think the problem with the parking lot, it's speaking as one member of the board, was that it wasn't adequately signed so that the Starbucks customers would know where to park. So that when Starbucks made a representation to the board that they had 13 spaces, there was really no way to rely on that. That's really the issue, I think. And the board hadn't made a request. Excuse me, just let me finish the point.
Sorry.
The board hadn't made a request that the Falcone or Starbucks organization make parking available to the general public.
My comment about making parking available to the general public dealt with the hearing back in 2003 or 2004.
No, I understand. That's just not an issue today.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think something that may help also is maybe some kind of signage in our store that lets people know there's parking out back. That might help too. If somebody comes in and they try to park on the street and then they realize there's some parking out back, that might help.
The other issue is people go into Starbucks and get a cup of coffee and then go to someplace else in the square, whether it be a salon or the bank or some other businesses in the area. So they're saying they're Starbucks customers, but they're not just going, getting their coffee and leaving.
Right. Let me ask the applicant, is that the extent of your, does that information conclude your presentation to the board on the application?
For the most part, yeah. I mean, I think that I can come up with to do is to mark the parking spaces for Starbucks customers only. Yeah.
Mr. Atchu, I wonder if you might speak to, your feeling from the town's perspective on the adequacy of the plan that we've seen.
I think for the purpose of what Starbucks is required to do for this, I think it's adequate. I don't think they're giving us any to enforcing the parking, who's parking what spots for. The reason why they're there it's going to be difficult to enforce any which way you look at it.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Do you have any further questions, Commissioner, on the application? Any questions? No questions, Joe? Commissioner, do you have any questions at all?
No.
Oh, okay. All right. So any members of the board have a question for the applicant before we close the
No.
evidence?
I don't, Mr. Chair. I recognize that there is there will be an enforcement problem even with the signs, and I'm not sure what we can do about that.
Yeah. Ms. O'Donnell?
No, Mr. Chair, I think that our concern, was to be sure that we knew from the parking plan that they had adequate parking for the seats at the Starbucks. The fact that I guess people would be, jamming their SUVs into this parking lot is really, as everybody pointed out, pretty hard to enforce in this neighborhood. But I think that we needed I thought our purview on this was to make sure that there was adequate seating for the restaurant use at Starbucks. And I think this plan is very helpful, and I would recommend that they put up better signage.
Yeah.
Excuse me. So you're, Mr. Brennan.
Mr. Brennan, can you stop sharing? Would you mind stop sharing?
Sure. Yeah, no problem.
Thank you. Great.
Your thought is, thank you. Your thought is to have one sign at each end of those 13 spaces that tells people that all the spaces in between are.
I was thinking we could do one of two approaches, either have two signs at the book ending each area with the arrow saying Starbucks customer parking in between signs, or we could put up a sign at each parking space, whatever the board prefers, I suppose. I think it might be less intrusive to the eye to have two signs, but also it might be less noticeable if there's only two signs. So whichever the board prefers. I personally think the two signs would be best. And maybe a sign at the entrance as well.
Yeah.
I think we could, unless you want to have a debate about that, I think we could speak to that during the deliberations. I definitely have a thought on that.
Okay.
But we could talk about it now. Why don't we talk about it now? We can get an idea of what my sense is you have two signs, you have two parking spaces. No one's going to pay attention to the other 11. I think we have to be realistic about the parking issues that are in the square. And the issue that I've had with this application is you either have 13 spaces or you don't. If you do, that's a very good thing. And to Kathleen's point, that's really what we're looking for. So I think you need 13 signs. I think actually you need 15 signs. I think you need a sign at each space. I think you need a sign at the entrance that says Starbucks customer parking, enter. And I think you need a sign in the store that says customer parking out back. I don't think that's a lot to ask. I think Mr. Falcone is going to have some challenges, and he knows this, with parking in general with his properties. That's a little bit of a different issue. We're really trying to zone in on Starbucks' needs. I know that this is probably going to have some collateral impacts on other parking in the square, but the issue in front of the board is whether or not you've got adequate parking to support the commercial need. I think I agree with the sense of the board right now that you've presented that, but I do think you need a heavy dose of signage, notwithstanding the fact that I agree with you. 13 signs isn't as pleasant to look at as two. But I just don't think it's going to be effective under the circumstances, That's my sense.
Yeah, makes sense to me.
Yeah. Members of the board, before we close the evidentiary, is there anything that you want to add or question, and then we can just deliberate the merits of the application?
No, Mr. Chair, I have nothing to add.
Mr. David?
I have nothing to add. I guess, yeah, my one question would be, I think there was some discussion at the last hearing, what happens at night. I understand there's less of a need for parking at night, but I guess the signs will still say what they say in terms of the parking being restricted to Starbucks customers.
Yeah, it could say during business hours, Because I think that's an excellent point, and I don't think we want to waste parking because that's a precious resource.
So you should be able to double up parking if the Starbucks is closed, right? That seems reasonable.
Mhm.
So, Mr. Brennan, is it capable to make that kind of a sign?
Yeah,
Starbucks customer parking during business hours?
sure.
That's a good point. Okay, why don't we close the evidentiary portion and we'll debate the, in accordance with the open meeting law, we'll debate the merits of the hearing. Let me remind the board that we're here to decide whether the proposed coffee shop and the proposed extension to the special permit for the coffee shop and retail uses in harmony with the general purpose and intent of the bylaw under Chapter 48, Section 9, and whether the applicant possesses sufficient parking spaces as the board may deem adequate under the circumstances to meet the parking needs of the proposed business. That's the standard that was articulated in to Mr. Falcone's point in the original 2000 hearing, in the 2000 application. So let me invite members of the board if they to be heard on the merits of the application, starting with Ms. O'Donnell.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Daber.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Can I just ask a question? Do we have to ask if there are any people who want to be heard that other than us? No,
I'm sorry. I forgot that.
That's okay.
Yeah. Let me ask that. Let me back up. Is there anybody else that would like to be heard on this application? I'm sorry.
I don't have any hands up.
Either in favor or opposed? Okay. All right, hearing none, we'll continue. Thank you, Ted. Appreciate that. Ms. O'Donnell?
Do we have to vote to close the public hearing or?
No. It's not
Okay.
closed. Yeah.
Okay. I thought that, I think that obviously the Starbucks, I think a lot of the comments were about the trash and about the parking. And I thought that they had come in, and I would put that in the decision, that they had, sort of a trash removal plan. The 3 receptacles, emptying 3 times a day, along with the parking situation, that the signage that we've mentioned. I mean, I think it provides a nice lively space for the square. It's, popular with everybody in the neighborhood, as you can tell by the number of people sitting there all the time. So I'm supportive of the application.
Great. Mr. Daber?
Yes, I would agree. The standard under the bylaws are there shall be sufficient parking spaces as the Board of Appeals may deem to be adequate under the circumstances to meet the parking needs of each such business. And I think with the plan and with the signage that's proposed, I feel comfortable that based upon past experience and based upon the reduction in seating in the Starbucks, that is adequate under the circumstances. And I think that the trash issue, again, was another issue. I think there were some other things that were mentioned too, in terms of sweeping in front of the store. I can't remember what was discussed on it, but I know that came up during the discussion as well. And I think there was something about landscaping, but I'm not sure that anything was decided on that as to whether anything should be suggested or proposed. Maybe I have it in my notes. But I think in terms of the parking and in terms of what they propose for the trash, I'm satisfied and I'm in favor of approval. And there is always, as I recall, a provision in our decisions that conditions can be modified if necessary or altered or whatever in the future. So.
Thank you, Mr. Dave. I agree with all that. I agree with my colleagues. Let me first say that, Mr. Brennan, I think it's important that you stress to Starbucks, and I know Mr. Falcone is on the phone on the call. This is the second time this permit has expired, and the board has had to have a full hearing on the merits. This should not be happening, and it shouldn't happen again, not with an organization like Starbucks. So there needs to be, we're gonna write this in the decision. There needs to be some self-discipline. And I don't think it's up to the board or the town to remind the applicant that the permit's about to expire. So we got to get into a better rhythm of not having these things expire and a couple of years later say, oh, they're expired. It's unacceptable. I toyed with suggesting to the board that we implement some type of fine policy, but then I think we get into whether we're beyond our statutory authority. I don't want that. We like Starbucks. Starbucks has been a good neighbor, and I agree with Ms. O'Donnell. It's a nice, lively, notwithstanding people's complaints about the congestion, and there's congestion in a busy area, but with congestion comes people and commerce and all the lively things that the town likes too. So I don't want to preach, but I do want to stress that it needs to be a system where this isn't going to happen again. So that was point one. I'd also like, I'd like Starbucks to submit to the building commissioner a landscaping plan to spruce the place up, that we can have on file. I don't think that had been a request of the applicants. We didn't really talk about whether you were going to do landscaping, but the place does need a bit of a spruce up, and I'd urge you to come to some agreement on that and submit that to the town. In terms of the conditions we talked about last time, Starbucks committed to monitoring the trash 3 times a day and to take care of it 3 times a day or as needed, but not less than 3 times a day. They also committed to monitoring the parking lot 3 times a day or as needed. So I'm listing these out because these are going to be conditions in the decision. You also committed to power washing the outside as needed, but not on any regular schedule. I think the testimony was that it would be expensive to do on a more regular schedule, but you did commit to doing it on as needed. You said that the signage, the exterior signage, would be subject to the further approval of the town in accordance with the town bylaws. So that's a Board of Selectmen issue. I just want to remind you of that. We talked about daily sweeping as needed, as is done routinely by any commercial occupant in the square. So that's a 4th or 5th commitment. We've talked about signing the spaces. 13 spaces would be signed for Starbucks parking during business hours. There'll be an additional sign at the entrance to the parking lot that states Starbucks customer parking, enter, or, the board's not going to approve a sign, but the building inspector can look at the sign and can know whether or not it complies with the requirement of the permit easily enough. So you got the sense it was your idea to begin with, and that there'll be a sign in the premises. I also think there should be a language that requires that you have some type of enforcement over it. Now, I think that's the kind of thing that we're going to have to see how it works. And I think the inspector or the commissioner, could be the police department gets involved. We don't know, but you ought to be self-policing it. You've committed to keep an eye on the parking 3 times a day anyway. But I don't think it's appropriate for us to require that you institute a towing program. I just don't know what's adequate or what's necessary. As Mr. Daba indicated, we could ask you to come back and we'll modify the permit if needed. But it doesn't seem like that's necessary right now. We're trying to respond to the reasonable needs of the town and balance the commercial needs for you to operate, a growing business. So that's my list of conditions. Other than the existing conditions to which the permit is subject, and assuming that those are acceptable to the applicant and the applicant's representatives and the property owner, who I know is also an applicant, I'd be prepared to vote for a 5-year extension of the special permit from the date that the decision is filed with the town clerk.
just to be clear that it's not going to be retroactive to when it expired. You'll get a full 5-year term. I think that it may not matter. It's too much to an organization like yours, but it seems like that's the right thing to do. But I did give that some thought. So I don't know if board members have any comments on those thoughts.
No, I think, Mr. Chair, that's a great, I mean, it's an outline. That's what I sort of had from my notes of the last hearing, the kinds of conditions we were thinking of in terms of the trash and the parking. I know the landscaping has been fixed up a little bit since we had our last hearing. There's a lot more mulch all of a sudden appeared, but
Perhaps that could be the plan.
so I did see that. I mean, as I said, I think the only two comments we got from the neighbors were, were on those two issues of the trash and the parking. So, and particularly the trash. But I would point out that we all, as I mentioned last time, Starbucks isn't the only trash generator in this neighborhood.
Right, right. I will say on the landscaping, and Mr. Falcone didn't have the benefit of the last hearing. I mean, the property it's a nice property. It's prominent property. It's successful property. It does speak to the town. And, from the Board of Appeals perspective, we'd like it to look better than it looks. And that was something that came up from an abutter. So I'd like to urge you to do the best you can to make it look the best you can. I know that the current plans don't call for a robust landscaping, but we'd like to see something on that. I don't know, Mr. Brennan, if you have something to say about that.
I did mention it to Mr. Falcone, so that's probably why the mulch showed up. We really, as Starbucks doesn't want to get too much into tending to the rest of the property, I don't know if it would help if we put some flowers around our patio or something like that we could tend to, but we're hoping to not have to do the landscaping around the building. We feel that that's more up to the owner of the building to handle that portion. And I did want to speak a little bit to the special permit lapsing, and that is a concern of ours as well. We do have a similar setup in Lexington where our permit expires every 5 years. So with this store and that store, we've implemented a calendar that if there's turnover and there's people in new positions, they're still notified that the special permit needs to be renewed so that it doesn't slip through the cracks. I think after 5 years go by, some people get promoted or they aren't in the position anymore and it kind of gets forgotten about, but it should not be happening in the future.
Thank you. Mr. Falcone, can you speak to whether or not it's possible to improve the landscaping in the exterior of the property?
Yes, actually, I spoke with Mr. Driscoll back in May about the mulch, and it was just his schedule that delayed it till recently. It had nothing to do with this permit application. Last year was a very hot summer, and all the shrubs around the building died. So that's why they were removed this year. The problem with doing any type of flowering things is it needs to have irrigation. And I'm not sure how Milton is about watering bans. Most communities, at least recently, other than this year, had those in place. I'd certainly be willing to look at what we can do to increase the landscaping or improve it, and in consulting with Starbucks as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's acceptable from my perspective of the board. We usually don't get into too many details about the type of landscaping. I mean, it'd be nice to have a plan on which we can rely. But I think given the small area and the prominent nature, I think it's in everybody's interest to make it look as good as it can within the bounds of what's acceptable to the town. I feel comfortable relying on the building commissioner to take a look at the plan and see whether or not it's adequate. Or at least to get it on file. And I like what we heard from Mr. Brennan about what might be possible. Mr. Falcone, you're a major business owner in East Milton Square. I think you recognize the importance of the beautification of the square. So it seems like it's a reasonable request, and we can rely on people to do something that's nice. Does that sound acceptable?
Oh, of course, it's very acceptable to me.
Commissioner, does that sound okay?
Yes, that's not a problem at all. Take care of that.
Mr. Brennan?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Sounds good.
All right. So with the landscaping and sweeping and the trash and the parking lot and the signage and the 5 years and the commitment to not let it happen again, the enforcement of the parking and the ability of the board to drag you back here if you violate any of these. That's a quick summary. I'll review the tape to make sure I got them all, but I do have a list here. I think that's a reasonable list of the conditions on which we're going to place this special permit. I also think it responds to what we've heard from the people who've asked to be heard. So with that, I'm prepared to support unless if my board members have anything to add, now's the time. Otherwise, I'll call for a vote.
I have nothing to add, Mr. Chair.
And neither do I, Mr. Chair.
All in favor of the granting of the special permit for 5 years from the date that we file the extension, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay, Mr. Brown and Mr. Falcone, congratulations on the special permit or the extension of the special permit. We'll incorporate the prior permits into the record, extended for 5 years, subject to the conditions we spoke about today. We'll file it with Julia. She'll provide it to you. You'll have a 20-day appeal period, and then you'll want to get that on file at the Norfolk County Registry of Deeds. I'm sure, Mr. Brennan, I'm sure you know the drill.
Yeah, I do.
You do this for a living.
Does it take a few weeks to get the decision typed up? Is that how it works?
It's completely dependent upon the workload of the 3 lawyers who are sitting in front of you today.
Gotcha.
Does anybody want to volunteer for this decision, or do you? I could do it if nobody is available.
Well, I could start it if you want and then send it off to you.
Okay, you want to do that, Ted?
Sure.
That'd be
That
great.
sounds good. Yep.
Kathleen, you're still working full time, right?
No, well, no, I was
what I
supposed to
heard.
be retired, but I haven't. That hasn't happened yet.
That's not what the Mass Conveyances Association has said.
Yeah. No, I'm supposed to be retired, but I'm not.
Well, I think
I'm
that
not
would be
working.
great. So, Mr. Brennan, I think you could expect it in a few weeks. And in the meantime, you can start to, you can rely upon, you got to get the signage and work on a few things here, obviously, but you can let your client, Mr. Falcone knows firsthand because he's here, that the permit will be extended, likely to be sometime in the month of September.
We filed for a renovation permit as well. Is it okay for the town to start the review on that? Would you say?
It's up to the commission. I don't think the board has an objection.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm working on the review now.
Awesome. Thank you, Joe.
And I'll try to get a draft to Jeff by next Wednesday.
Awesome. Thank you all so much.
Okay, if there's any other matters, unless there's other matters in front of the board, I'll call for a motion to adjourn the hearing.
Yeah. No, Kathleen, can you send it to me too?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Good.
Okay. Thanks. All right.
Motion to adjourn's on the table.
Thank you.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
So
Aye.
moved. The board is in recess. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Have a
Congratulations.
good evening. Bye
Have a
now.
good night.
Sure.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Have a good night.